Rebuilders today, a bit of an emergency episode. What are we looking at, Mark?
Tariffs, the trade war, and the big picture. Everything you've been wondering, like so many people contacting me, what's going on? What's the big picture behind this? What's going to happen? All that and more today.
Great. Well, let's just get straight into it, eh? Welcome to Rebuilders today. A bit of an emergency kind of episode, or just we'll chuck one in there. It's I'm Daniel. This is Mark.
Hello.
We are without a Liddy today.
Is she climbing a mountain or something?
I think so. Yeah.
Cool.
Just climbing mountains. Very biblical.
Yeah.
So blessings to her. It's a decent amount going on in the world.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd take the opportunities to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bit of an emergency pod. We weren't going to record, but all that's happening in the world. I came in late last night from Sydney, at a delayed flight, got in at 1 a.m., just finished lunch. Could have stuff in my teeth, but anything could happen in this episode.
Last episode we did was the following morning, following our following morning was Liberation Day.
Yes, that's right. We didn't. I think we said something like, "We won't talk about Liberation Day because it hasn't happened."
Hasn't happened yet. Yeah. So,
and I had the sense that it was going to be pretty momentous. And here we are. Can I just say one thing too? Two just quick bantery things before we get into it.
Yeah, please.
Number one, massive audience response. Not about tariffs. We'll talk about that'll be after this one, but around oats, oatmeal, porridge.
It's a real passion.
It was an avalanche from our audience.
I know, I really
an avalanche of oats.
Yeah. Liddy came in the office today. Today, a couple of days ago, with a container of oats, cold oats. So she's embracing the new way.
Yeah.
I'm staying the course.
Well, what I learned is Americans have different names in different places. Because we had different Americans saying, we call them this, we call them that. So it's obviously regional.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which, good on you and good on the oat industry. We're keeping you afloat.
The other thing I'd say, the other bit of banter is, I think as the podcast has grown, we've now got to the point where we realise that if we mention anything or anywhere in the world, there's people from there listening. So I'm just going to admit I think I made a comment last time obviously America's got influences, but are there Christian influences in Bulgaria? Well, thank you to our Bulgarian listeners.
Yeah,
there are
we
Christian influences there. We see you. We appreciate you. And on to tariffs.
All right. So this will kind of just be a broad conversation, but I've got some questions for you just to kind of give some narrative to this, so our listeners can follow along. But first up, can you just kind of paint the picture for us? What is happening?
Okay. So, Donald Trump came in talking about tariffs. And for those who don't understand, so I'm going to try and stick away from the super economic nerdy bits because some people get lost. But essentially a tariff is a kind of tax that is put on trade between countries. And so we have Donald Trump has been talking about tariffs. It's been a particular passion of his for a number of years. And, obviously there were tariffs put on automotives coming into the US from Mexico and Canada. So that was sort of the first range of it.
Yeah.
And then we had Liberation Day. And so Liberation Day was this announcement day that he did from the Rose Garden, where he announced his new economic order around, and we'll get into that, around the tariffs that the United States was going to sort of enact. And there were a lot of people thinking that this is going to be sort of low level. It's a lot of noise and really, not much, consequential. And then there were people thinking it was the worst. Well, it was basically worse than what people thought.
Yeah.
So sort of baseline of 10%. But then people began to realize that, no, this is across countries across the world. I think it was over 100 nations, even small countries like Lesotho in Africa. Quite humorously, a couple of Australian territories got tariffed, which are part of Australia, for those who don't know. So
what territories were
there? Well, there were Norfolk Island, which is a small island in the Pacific that is an Australian territory.
What's the export from there?
I don't know. In the 19, I think the British Empire originally sort of settled Norfolk Island, and I think some of their population is from people who mutinied on the Bounty, going way back. If you remember that, historical,
yeah.
And there's a movie with Mel Gibson and Anthony Hopkins. But I think back in the day they went there because it was the famous Norfolk pines. And they were very straight, long pines that they used them for ships' masts. So I'd like to say hello to anyone listening in the Norfolk Island.
Population of just over 2,000.
Yeah, 2,000 people. This is the real test of the reach of our podcast. Hello, if you're in the Norfolk Islands, drop us a line. And then he also tariffed Heard Island, which is
that's way down.
Uninhabited Australian territory or island off
closer to Antarctica.
Which there are no humans who live there, only penguins, and that it resulted in an avalanche of penguin memes. There's some great ones, AI ones of like Trump and JD Vance speaking to penguins in the White House.
According to this Guardian article, the US imported $1.4 million worth of products from Heard Island and McDonnell Island, which is down there as well, in 2022, which was nearly all of which was machinery and electrical exports.
But how does that happen when no one's there? So
I don't know.
This gives part of the indication that there was a sort of element where there was a bit of thought hadn't gone into this.
Yeah.
We'll just put that there.
Yeah.
Okay, so tariffs are put on multiple countries, particularly China is very notable, the European Union. But then the sort of surprise was that part of this, the rhetoric was around trade surpluses. So basically trade deficits, trade surpluses are if you and I are trading and you export more to me than I export to you, that's like a deficit or a surplus, depending on the direction of trade. So what Trump was arguing was that people were exporting more to America than they're exporting the other way. So what that does is it benefits countries' industry.
Yes.
So for example, if the country of Mark is exporting to the country of Daniel, then I have more people technically who are in work, who can work in the factories making these mugs that we are exporting to you. And so this has been one of sort of Trump's bugbears.
Yeah.
Now, interesting.
And as my country and the people in my country are paying more for your goods.
Yes. So you put a tariff on
money.
Yes, yeah. So, and interestingly, Australia doesn't have that, and America exports more to Australia than vice versa.
Yeah.
But there were things so you would think that we should be fine, but Australia got slapped with a 10% tariff alongside New Zealand, UK, and the argument for that was because Australia won't accept US beef. The reason we won't accept US beef is because Australia has very strict biosecurity laws being an island, and because the US doesn't do the requisite tests on mad cow disease, that's why they rejected. Also, for example, he's also upset the European Union won't accept chicken, I think it is, from the US, but that's because chicken in the US is washed in chlorine and, so there's various chemical things. So that's traditionally not thought of as tariffs, but he's expanded what tariffs mean here. So that's effectively what happened. And just to go through the next details, this immediately caused a massive market, downturn. You could argue it's a crash. Obviously the US stock market crashed, the tech, and we'll dig into this more, but just in the 30,000 foot view, European markets crashed, Australian stock market crashed, Asian market crashed. So we're seeing overall a really tumultuous time in the markets. So a lot of people that have superannuation or 401ks have seen a lot of value. Cryptocurrencies are down. And, a lot of the sort of top banks, Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan, all these people are predicting now a high likelihood of a recession in the United States and possibly a global recession. So that's the overarching chaos in the markets, blood in the streets, as they say on Wall Street.
Yeah, okay. Just feels like an obvious question, but I still don't feel like I've got a clear answer. Why? Like tariffs are, from my understanding of tariffs, they are a tax that is imposed on imports that need to be paid by the importer. Therefore, in my mind, I'm like, well, wouldn't and then there's debate around does the and tell me if I'm getting into the weeds in this, but then doesn't the company that's doing the import pay that, or the consumer that they're selling that onto then pay that?
Yes.
So in my mind, the US then would be, that's more of a issue for the US. They're paying more for imports. Why then does the rest of the world feel the fallout of that?
So the short answer is yes. Well, maybe it's easier to dig in. So yeah, just initially. So basically, again, to put us, and please don't embarrass. I've had a lot of friends who are really smart people who perhaps not as strong on economics, who don't understand this stuff. So effectively, let's talk about Volkswagen, right? So just say you're selling Volkswagens into the United States and you're from a country that's got a free trade agreement. I think, and maybe there'll be people, because now everyone in every industry listening to this podcast can pick up mistakes we make. But I think there were Volkswagens made in Mexico. There's the North American Free Trade NAFTA agreement, which meant that they can be then imported into the US without a tariff. Okay, so you're an American, you want to buy a Volkswagen, you can buy it. I'm just going to make up a number, $30,000, right? But then if America puts a tariff on foreign cars coming in, the goal behind that is so that the local American car industry of General Motors or Ford can do well, that factories won't be moved to Mexico. Because it's seen then as that Mexico has an advantage because workers are paid less in Mexico. So therefore, Volkswagen can make its car for $30,000 and Ford's got to make its car for $50,000. So then you slap a tariff on the Volkswagen car. And so, yes, Volkswagen or whatever in Mexico has to then, cop that and take that tax. But then what Volkswagen inevitably does is, well, we're going to now charge $60,000 for our Volkswagen. So you, as the American, you've got two choices. You either buy the Ford. This is how it's meant to work in Trump's mind. You go, well, I'm going to buy a Ford for $50,000 versus the Volkswagen for $60,000. But inevitably, there are products and things which you can't make locally. And we'll get more into that. So there is a cost that is passed on. And what will happen to then is just say all of a sudden Volkswagen are now selling their car for $60,000. Ford might go, our cars are $50,000. If we make them $55,000, they're still cheaper and we go up in our profits. So there's cost rises even with local products. That's the super layman
that makes sense. Okay. So it's trying to achieve a boost in industry, bringing stuff back on shore. In the US, but at the same time raising more tax, having more tax revenue for government spending, that kind of stuff.
And so in that example I just gave, which is the problem we're facing here, is so your answer is yes, it costs the American consumer more, and it costs Volkswagen in Mexico more. So costs are paid in two ways.
All right, and then so if that's tariffs, but then we're seeing markets plunging, stock market tickers just kind of winding down, going into the red. How is that then? How is that this thing causing a global reaction?
Okay, so this is where we need to then pull out to the big picture.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so the world, and we've talked about some of this before. Effectively, the economic model for most of the world, particularly over the last 30 years, has been one of globalization. So globalization doesn't just mean everyone in the world becoming friends. When we say globalization, we mean a number of things, but one of the core things we mean by that is not just people flying around the world, but the fact that there is free trade in the world. So, for example, the idea that you can trade with countries. So if there are tariffs, it then follows that there's less trade in the world. So there's less opportunities. That there's less ability to make complex things. So, for example, there's been in a number of, I've seen online, an example of a Boeing 787, right? A Boeing 787, the amount of countries that contribute elements to that plane is incredible. So what that means is that you can build something and you have resources from all over the world to build that thing. That means you can build more complex things.
Yeah.
So, for example, phones have a whole bunch of things from it. It might have a microchip that is made in Taiwan. It might have rare earth minerals that come from Africa. It may have screen glass that comes from this place.
Yeah.
So it allows a greater complexity of a supply chain, which enables you to build things and move things around the world much quicker without barriers. And then, the argument then is that this has enabled a greater level of prosperity in the world. So, for example, if you look at a television, you can look at, what let's use a home entertainment system, right? A home entertainment system with a stereo or whatever, is not that much different in price than it was in 1990.
Yeah.
Because what happened was all of a sudden, there were new markets, and it's not just markets to get stuff from, but it's also labor markets. So a country like Vietnam may actually then all of a sudden find that it can produce things. It's got a cheaper labor force. The argument, and I'm giving the pro-globalization argument, I'm going to come to the negative argument a bit later on, but the pro-globalization argument is it's good for Australians because they can buy cheaper clothes, but it's also good for Vietnam because it's creating all these jobs.
Sure. Yeah.
That's the argument for free trade. So free trade has been seen as argued as a positive in the last 30 years, particularly again since the fall of the Soviet Union, and we talk about that golden period. One of the sort of that period is defined by globalization and free trade. So what that has enabled is economic interdependence. But the other argument for it is that if we're trading, so for example, if you and I are trading and you're not going to get your medicines unless my factories make them, and I'm not going to get your lumber to build houses unless you're providing that, we're less likely to go to war because we're so independent. It's like two friends. If two friends, I've got my sofa at your house and I've borrowed your phone and you've got my birth certificate, we're less likely to just walk away from each other because there's a whole bunch of, like things that we're holding for each other.
Yes. Which is kind of like when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was all suddenly, let's sanction all these things in the hope that would deter our war, which
it didn't in the way that people expect. And that's part of this interesting story.
Yeah.
So the negative side of globalization is globalization tends to benefit certain types of people and disadvantage others. So one group of people it benefits is the very wealthy, because they're able to take the capital, the money that they have, invest it in all new ways, have all kinds of new trade opportunities. So if you're in business, if you've got money, with globalization, there's a lot of money to be made in the world.
Yeah.
Secondly, you look at China. China's people that it's risen out of poverty in the last 30 years from being a very sort of doctrinaire communist country to being a communist country that embraced the market. You've seen a huge amount, millions of people coming out of poverty because all of a sudden money from around the world was all of a sudden investing in factories in China, which meant that people could get a factory job, they could send their kids to university, those kids get a good job, they buy a fancy new BYD car, and all of a sudden the economy uplift of China. Yeah. Where it's the negatives happen is it's been bad for industrial heartlands of countries, particularly Western developed countries who formerly used to make that stuff. So, for example, the north of England. The north of England is poorer, has lower life expectancy than the south because the north was the heartland of coal mining or the Midlands, there was cars being made. When all of a sudden the British car industry really struggled to compete with, like MG now is actually owned by China. Yeah. And I think Jaguar is partially owned by. We should check that up. I'll let you fact check me as you write that before we get an email from
Tata
listeners.
Motors
Is Indian, I think.
Sure.
Yes, I think it's from India.
Yes.
So and the other thing, and you look at the US. So in the US, you've got what is sort of known as the Rust Belt.
Yep.
These are places, like Michigan, for example, which were, Detroit was called Motor City because you had this post-war this incredibly huge and profitable car industry. Japan was coming out of the war. It had been bombed. Europe's industry had been bombed. So America and Australia had a free rein to develop its industry. Australia had a car industry. There's no car industry in Australia anymore because of offshoring. So offshoring is when factories and production is moved elsewhere. So what this means is, and you're seeing it now, one of the drives behind populism in Europe, in many parts of the world, in the United States, counties in the United States, for example, that were Democrat, because traditionally industry places were Labor. There's a lot of unions in Britain and Australia. We have the Labor Party. In New Zealand, there's the Labor Party. That they represented the workers. So they were in the left, if that makes sense. But what you've seen is a lot of these Rust Belts is they've gone to populists on the right because they're like, well, globalization's benefiting all these people. There's a lot of rich people in Midtown, New York or whatever, Manhattan, or in London or in Paris, or in Sydney, but we've actually lost our jobs up here. And our country's getting worse. And then you look at, particularly in the US, deaths of despair they talk about, which is, the rise of things like fentanyl and so on in these communities, which are really broken. So it's creating a political problem. Now, that's number one. So one thing that Donald Trump is trying to do with this is initially, because people were looking at this through the lens of, well, this is a bargaining tool. This is art of the deal. You go within a crazy, I'll pay you $2 for your $20,000 watch just to start the bidding and throw you off. That's what people thought, because that's Trump 1.0. But in Trump 2.0, and I'll again dig into this more, Trump is actually trying to remake the global economic order. Okay, so that's number one. So there is a political problem that globalization has created, and Trump's trying to respond to that. The second thing, when Trump won the election, we did a number of episodes, and one of them I outlined the overarching issue or maybe it was even before. I can't remember when I said it, but long and short is the overarching defining issue for the United States is not polarization over this part of the cultural war or that cultural war, is the massive amount of debt the United States which is utterly unsustainable. So I think currently debt repayments are higher than what the US is paying for its military. Now, this is hugely problematic. And I think I talked about last time, you can look at, Paul Kennedy's book on the rise and fall of civilizations and nations. You can look at Ray Dalio's book on the cycles of, empires get to a crisis point when they can no longer pay for the empire. So to have an empire, you've got to have control over territory. The US has military bases all throughout the world. And I know there's some equivocation over whether, the US is technically an empire, but let's just call it the superpower of the world. To stay the superpower in the world, you have to have be the economic dominant power and the military dominant power. Yes. And I would say there also previously, until recently, there was a lot of soft power, Hollywood, entertainment, music, ideas, stuff like this. So part of the problem is to continue that economic power, this debt at some point starts to undermine that. America's had dollar dominance in the world. At some point, the fiscal problem of that massive debt starts to undermine that. And then thirdly, if your debt repayments in a world where interest rates are going up, eventually that's going to stop your ability to pay for a big US military to dominate the world. Now, again, Berlin Wall falls, 1989. America's the dominant superpower in the world. But what we now have is a peer competitor, a great power competition with China. China's doing a massive military buildup. I think the Chinese Navy is now bigger than the US Navy. The tech race, which China was far behind, it's catching up at a rapid rate. And there's arguments over AI, is China ahead, quantum computing, all these questions, drone technology. Just a side note, and this will infuriate people because they want me to do a whole episode on it. A lot of the whole UAP, UFO thing could simply be that China has invented a drone that America can't understand and is trying to keep up. That's just a side note. I'm not sure. That's just a theory that some people have speculated. So this Donald Trump and people in power in Washington know that coming down the road at them, it could be a little way off, it could be quicker than we think, is a massive debt problem.
Yeah.
This is the person who, put it in this way, this is the kid whose parents were wealthy, they've inherited wealth, but now they're not working as hard as they used to. So they're putting stuff on the credit card. And there's a point where the repo man comes and takes your car.
Yeah.
So the fear now is, I just heard something outside, it's 3 a.m., is that the repo man coming to take my car? Yeah. This is the fear. So what Donald Trump is trying to do here is he's argued, and this has been long a bugbear of his, back to the 80s, that America's getting eaten for lunch by, first it was the Japanese and then the Chinese, that the trade imbalances, these trade deficits are actually disadvantaging the United States. Now, there is some willful blindness, I'm going to say there, because the United States is the biggest economy in the world, biggest military in the world. Despite what people may feel about its decline, and recently, in the midst of this sort of cost of living crisis and sluggishness in the global economy, it's still one of the better performing economies.
Yeah, yes.
So there's an element where this entire structure of globalization that I've just described was built by America.
Yes.
This was the fruit of winning the Cold War, a global connected trading network, and America was a liberal democracy. And as core part of liberalism in its purest sense, I'm not talking left-wing progressives, was, free thought, free speech, free trade.
Yes.
Freedom of religion. It was one of those frees that went with all this sort of stuff. So classically, people on the right, classical liberals, people on the right, conservatives, were all about free trade. Okay, so what Donald Trump is trying to do is restructure. And how do I know this? Well, if you listen to economic advisors like Peter Navarro and Howard Lutnick or whatever, and there's another guy, Miran, I think his name is, people have been digging into their papers. What they're saying is this is about realizing this, the economic order for America is not working. There is problems with globalization, which are there. We did a whole thing on neoliberalism and the problems, it's been creating. It's driving populism. Someone has to do something about it. There's a point where the Band-Aid, the plaster has to be ripped off. Yeah. And he's just gone big and ripped it off in a way that no one expected that he would. Okay, so that's effectively what's happening in the world. But also this is, the other reason is because of the great power competition with China, to win a war, what the Ukraine war has reminded us, you need a massive industrial base.
Yeah.
You need to be able to build tanks. You need to be able to build planes. You need to be able to be in somewhat sort of independent. So, for example, I'm just going to use the example of diabetes medicine. There's a lot of people in the United States with diabetes. Their health and well-being and even lives depend on insulin. So much of the insulin's made in China. So, for example, China takes back Taiwan and the US military challenges it. China could simply go, hey, well, you want those insulin, they're not coming. We saw this during COVID when there was different countries hoarding different elements of PPE. Yes. So there's this crazy thing of you and I are going to go to war, but you've got my house keys and my Ventolin or something. I don't use Ventolin, but if you've got something that I need, I'm going to think twice about it.
Yeah.
So China has been massively building up its industrial base. For some time, China went through a housing stimulus to keep its economy going. But that's now moved to an industrial stimulus. So China has been producing all of this stuff in the world. Cars are an example. China is now the leading producer of electric cars in the world, and they're incredibly futuristic, better than European cars, better than American cars. And so the plan is, well, we're just going to flood these into the world and particularly into America so that it can undermine their economic power. So where we are is, this is about tariffs, but this is about a full-blown trade war that was already in play between the United States and China that's now gone into full effect. So this is a long answer. I'll finish in a second and take a breath. But what we are seeing is a fundamental reordering of the global economy that Trump has now done in a hugely disruptive way, that is going to change everything. So that world, which we've talked about, which has been changing, we've talked about before, it's socially changing, politically changing, technologically changing, it was economically changing. He just went from 10 in the speed limit to 180 on the speed limit. So this will fundamentally change everything. I just listen, every expert I've listened to, traders, globalization people, economists, political people, there is not one person I'm yet to who's like, oh, look, it's not much of a biggie. Everyone is, this is epochal changing. This is massive.
Yeah. It's a quick one. Is there a going back from this, or is this once you head down this road where what happens if someone else comes in to presidency and rolls back all these tariffs, or they get rejected by?
Okay, so not too long ago, it was 2 years, 18 months, 2 years. It's hard to know the last few years. Britain had a new Prime Minister, Liz Truss.
Yep.
And her Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng, proposed a new economic model for Britain to get them out of the slump. And it was around tax cuts and so on. And basically the concern was doing this in a time of inflation would cause so much instability in Britain.
Yeah.
And so basically what happened was there was sort of a run on the bond market, which was really the City of London, the economic hub of the City of London, saying, no, we're not doing this. And there was no doubt phone calls made to people in the Conservative Party from their friends in the City of London, trading rooms and banks saying, no, this has got to stop. Mm-hmm. And Liz Truss was basically removed from power, and Rishi Sunak came in.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we're at a similar moment, but there's a big difference with Britain. With Britain, you've got a parliamentary leadership style, the same as in our country, where the cabinet and the party in power can remove the prime minister. There were people in the Conservative Party who still had power behind the scenes. It wasn't Liz Truss's party; she didn't control it all. There were multiple factions, and they still had enough sort of like gravitas to say, "No, you're out." The market also still had a say. So, finance and banking and whatever, money in City of London and in other places could say, no, we're not having this.
Yeah.
Okay, problem with Donald Trump, the problem with doing this with this, and there's people who want to do it, like Musk as we speak is pretty much in open rebellion. The Silicon Valley wing we've spoken about is pretty much in rebellion. The Wall Street wing, which came across to Trump, as part of his new coalition, is pretty much in rebellion about this. This is a victory. I've talked about the Musk wing and the Bannon wing.
Yes,
this is the Bannon wing's ideology. America first, economic nationalist, pro-worker, almost. If you can think about it this way, there's the right and left wing of Trumpianism. This is the left wing is now ascendant. And just to state this, for the bizarro world we are all in. The Chinese Communist Party, as it's still called, and they still read Marx, is just putting out statements saying we are all about global free trade. That is literally what your Milton Friedman, Hayek, super right-wing conservative economists have said for the last 30 years. It's all about free trade, tariffs are the devil, right? So the Communist Party is putting out propaganda, and they put out this video too about this. The Communist Party is pushing a super conservative economic model. Now, I know there's quibbles. Is it really conservative, state-run, blah, blah. Sure. But still, the Communist Party of China is promoting free trade. The Republican Party, which many people call far right, is promoting one of the most left-wing economic. This is the Australian Labor Party of the 1930s would have wanted to do this. Protectionism, trade barriers, tariffs, protect the local workers, industrialisation. This is the Jerry Seinfeld episode where he goes to the bizarro world, Jerry, or Lane goes to the bizarro Jerry world, and everything is back to front. So I just had to note that because this is grey zone. Up is down, down is up. Yeah. So your question, can we get out of this? I think the damage is done. Trump is 100% doubling down. He's just said, as of recording, he's just instigated 105% tariffs on China.
Yeah.
China's responded. So this is now escalating. And it's increasingly clear, and just listening to people on, watching different financial markets and stuff like that, and listening to people, they are saying they're realizing now this isn't as much a negotiating tool. This is the real deal. He wants to blow up and rebuild the economic order I don't think we go back. And even I think the problem is trust has been broken now.
Yes.
So Australia has a free trade agreement with the United States. They've just slapped 10% on us. Australia's not going to trust the US. And we're good mates, like with the US. Like we're probably as close as it gets. Canada, Mark Carney came out and said, basically the relationship's broken. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of Britain, came out and said the era of globalization's over. Everyone knows we're not going back.
Yeah. Okay. It always feels a little bit like, sorry to drag up COVID, but when COVID happened and suddenly like everything just suddenly changed. And there was this kind of window for a while, like, we'll just see through these few weeks and then it'll be okay. But it was like, no, this is bigger than
this is huge. And this is structural change. And just to, again, repeat another maxim, it feels like this is some of the stuff we've said is all happening at once in previous episodes. We said that this is going to be the most consequential presidency. It's becoming that.
Yeah.
2, we said that the big issue for the US is going to be this debt. This is what this is about. 3, we also say, this is more predicting, cultures downstream from geopolitics. People say, that movie or, that cultural trend or this like this. No, this means you're in a recession or even a depression. This means like travel to the US from the rest of the world has utterly plummeted. I don't know the exact number. I'm thinking it's literally like 75%. Oh, wow. There's now warnings that if you're traveling to the US, like from Western countries, be prepared to have your devices searched.
Yes, yeah.
For possible commentary around the government. That's unheard of in my life. So this is going to radically reshape culture going forward.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We've probably touched on it somewhat, but it's worth asking the question: what are the big implications? Of all of this?
So I'm not going to give a prediction. I'm going to give 3 predictions with probabilities.
Great.
When you think about it, there's only 3 ways that this goes. Well, I'm going to get 4. Oh, 4's the can it go back. 4 is like Trump just goes, April Fools.
Gotcha.
I was joking. I love you all, and sends everyone a gift hamper and says, sorry, guys, it was a giant joke. There was some hope after 24 hours that Trump would walk them all back. It's not happening. He's doubling down. The market's crashing. He keeps going. Musk is clearly going after him. He's getting calls. There was 48 hours ago, a bunch of business leaders flew to Mar-a-Lago. He's not backing down. So I think that's highly unlikely.
Calling it like the medicine that we need.
Yes.
The world economy needs.
Yes. And as someone said too, I saw online, someone said, if you believe the conspiracy theory, which is not necessarily a conspiracy theory, it's not without foundation, that Wall Street actually runs America or the World Economic Forum, forget about it. This goes against everything that Wall Street or the World Economic Forum or those people want. So number 1, that's highly unlikely. Number 2 is Trump pulls it off. Trump brings a golden age of prosperity to America. There's also talk of him getting rid of income tax in America, and magically all the countries pay the tariffs, and global trade goes from a win-win situation to a zero-sum America wins situation, and America pays off its debt and all the revenue from all these tariffs. Everyone moves their factories to America. So that's what he's saying too. If you want to, that's part of the thinking here. If, I don't know, Japanese company which makes barbecues and is exporting to America, Trump's solution is, well, you need to build your Japanese barbecue factory in, I don't know, Michigan, and that means American workers get paid, et cetera, they can be taxed and so on. So, that's basically that idea. So number 1, Trump pulls this off and America wins. Now, just say that's true.
Yeah.
For all of our that's probably maybe some of our American listeners are hoping for that.
Yeah.
If you're a non-American, what has changed in the world is the previous model was America's the global superpower, but the rhetoric of neoliberalism was we rise, we all rise together.
Yes.
So America does a trade deal with, I don't know, Portugal, it's good for America, good for Portugal. Trump's policy here is zero sum. This is about we want America to win. So like Australia, they want literally. I saw a guy saying, Americans, should be able to sell their beef to Australia because it's beautiful. So that doesn't win for Australia. But the new game is that even if you're an ally, even if you're one of the strongest allies like Australia or Denmark who have fought with America, seen soldiers die alongside Americans in American campaigns, you will economically lose. So that's the implications of that. I think that's highly unlikely that this can pull up. We are now in a world which is very different to previous years of protectionism, where you go back 150 years, or there was some in the 1930s, which was a response by Hoover and so on to the Great Depression. If you go back to that world, it was a less of a complex world. As I said, the example of the Boeing. Just think about Apple, right? Apple, designed in California, but primarily made in China, because American workers are, not going to be paid the kind of wages that they can get in factories in China, Foxconn factories in China. Apple saw during Trump won and then into Biden that a trade war was brewing with China. So they decided to hedge their bets. They started opening, iPhone started getting built in India, Vietnam. Yeah. Now Trump's just slapped tariffs on India and Vietnam. So they're now faced with the reality of having to make everything in America. And I've seen wild estimates of iPhones of everything from $3,000 to $15,000 to cost. So the complexity of the supply chain. I think I heard this stat. There's something like a car. Again, I may get this wrong, but an American car, like even a GM car, crosses the US, Mexican, and Canadian borders multiple times as it's being made.
Yeah, wow.
That's going to get tariffed every time. Like cruise ships. I was in Sydney yesterday. I was walking past Sydney Harbour, and there's a massive cruise ship there, which would be owned by Americans, but it was flagged to, I can't remember which, Trinidad or something, Trinidad and Tobago, but a lot of them are American. So I was reading about how cruise ships are now in huge trouble because they'll be classified because they're flagged under the other country. So the complexity of the global economy is so much, I can't see how. So, option number 2, I can't see how this is pulled off. Final comment, I can see you got a question. Howard Lutnick, who's Trump's, I think he was on Face the Nation or whatever it is on Sunday, and he's like, in foreign countries, they're screwing in the little screws. Americans are now going to be screwing in little screws, or it'll all be robots. But like, how long does that take? So even if America can pull this off, just say this option happens and America reindustrializes, the tariffs make America rich, you're looking at a multi-year transitional period of probably recession until that happens. So best case scenario, America wins and there's a golden age in 3, 5, 6, 7 years. But until then, huge economic turmoil and recession. That's my first 2. Did you have a question?
No, I was just making notes as you were going. Okay, so what's number 3?
Number 3 is we go into a global recession or depression.
Yeah.
There's contagion in the markets. There is a realization of the complexity of international supply chains. This fails. America goes into recession. It causes the trade war with China, causes China's already sluggish economy to slow down even further. That means China's not buying, iron ore from Australia. We go into recession. New Zealand goes, everyone goes into recession. Domino effects, similar to the GFC, but different to the GFC, which was sort of like leveraged debt. This is sort of just the decision of an economic thing, and there's a global, this stock crash just keeps going, and market crash and everything goes down, and huge amounts of money sucked out of the economy. The fourth,
just on that, it's worth and you'll know much better than me because I was still just a young man when this happened, GFC, but there was, for countries like Australia, we were able to stay somewhat okay because of stimulus, and I feel like where you're able to do that in 2008, where we're at now, this
leads us to point 4.
Okay.
So point 4 is, so some countries like Australia, inflation has gone down. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'll just lay out 4 and then I'll talk about stimulus.
Great.
So option 4 is I saw the interview that the Australian government did, the Prime Minister did when this all happened, Liberation Day. He did one within hours, and they had their trade minister, our trade minister there, and the trade minister said basically effectively words to, almost as this conference ends, I'm not going to be on the phone to the European Union. So option 4 is all of a sudden the European, like I know now, the European Union talking to Mexico, the European Union talking to Australia, the European Union talking to New Zealand, that all of a sudden you get trade deals across the world. India does one with the European Union, there's talk of a CANZAC, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK, all of a sudden do this massive trade deal. We're all trading with each other. There was talk of Canada joining the European Union. There's even, I heard, not that necessarily you join the European Union, but we have a trade deal with them. We're really close, where it is not it's not out of the possibility where in 10 years, Australia and New Zealand are in the European Union. I know, it sounds insane. Japan jumps on board. Korea jumps on board. Singapore jumps on board. Argentina jumps on board. And all of a sudden you have the rest of the world goes, okay, we're just going to keep free trading. It's 2010. And America erects a wall around it. And you're already seeing this, people start to become friends with China again. There's some hesitancy there, but the East Asian economies or Southeast Asian economies like Vietnam, Thailand, these places, which were sort of like the US was trying to bring over onto its side, they've been slapped with massive tariffs. They'll get sucked back into the Chinese orbit. So China trades, China becomes a champion of international trade. European Union becomes a champion of international trade. They reindustrialize. The countries in the rest, it's the rest of the free world. They start buying European weapons instead of American weapons. And you then have stimulus in those countries. So the problem the US has is that tariffs will most likely increase inflation. I think it's 2% or something in the US. I've seen estimates that will go to 4 to 5% with tariffs.
Yeah, okay.
You can't stimulate. It's hard to stimulate the economy when you've got inflation because you don't want to overinflate it. But the problem is 2 days before Liberation Day, the data coming through the US was of stagflation.
Yep.
So we did a thing on the 1970s. 1970s had stagflation, which is the worst of two worlds, where you have a sluggish economy, which is like economy in recession. Now, normally when the economy's in recession, you don't have inflation, you have deflation.
Yes.
So prices are going down because no one's got any money, so they've got a lot of prices and things that aren't worth as much. And then when the economy is overheated, that's when you get inflation. In stagflation, it's like the worst of both worlds. It's like you've got a fever or flu and you're hot and cold and you're shivering at the same time. So it looks like the US was heading into stagflation, and there's a real chance now with tariffs that will increase, where because of trade barriers, the US economy will slow down and inflation will increase. It's very hard then for central banks can't stimulate because you're going to just put inflation up to 7%. And the government doesn't have many options then. So option 4, I'll just go through them all. Option 1, Trump says April Fool's, it's all a joke. This is not going to happen. We'll just throw that. That's not even going to happen. The second one is Trump pulls this off.
Yeah.
But that's going to be really hard for the rest of the world. And I think that's fairly unlikely he's going to be able to pull this off. Option 2 is that we get into a global recession. Option
2, he pulls it off. Option 3.
Option 3 is the world goes into a recession or a depression.
Yeah.
Option 4 is America goes into recession, depression, and the rest of the world finds a way to cope and possibly even flourishes.
Yeah, okay.
And the final thing in that is the world starts to move away from the US dollar being the dominant reserve currency. Nixon took the US dollar. So it was the Bretton Woods sort of economic order after World War II, where it was so the US dollar was the dominant currency connected to the value of gold. Nixon, in the Nixon shock, took it off the gold standard, so it just was the US dollar floating. So that meant the US government's central bank could control the value of the dollar in the world. If people start to move away from the dollar because they don't trust the dollar and they don't trust America, America's power will rapidly diminish.
Yeah, totally.
So in that last model, America's power significantly diminishes as potentially China's power grows.
Yes. And I imagine within that as well, like, or you kind of alluded to it, like boundary lines are kind of redrawn.
I mean, just to give some examples, this is radical, and maybe if you're in the US, you're not picking this up. Justin Trudeau's party, the Liberal Party in Canada, was in for an utter pasting. Pierre Poilievre was an absolute shoo-in to win. He's from the Conservative Party. And Mark Carney, when Justin Trudeau resigned, was chosen as the leader. Mark Carney is now probably going to win. I think I saw Politmarket had it 70% now. The Liberals are going to win, which is unheard of. That it is this 51st state thing and Liberation Day has completely upended politics in Canada. In Australia, our centre-left party, the Labor Party, was probably going to do really badly. The Prime Minister was unpopular. The Conservatives look like they're going to do really well. In the last week,
last night,
it's completely turned around. Yeah. And because the Conservative Party, anything that looks even like a potential Trump is fearful now. Yeah. At the beginning of the Australian election campaign, you were hearing the word woke was like, Albanese's weak woke and this.
Yeah.
Trump is now has replaced the word woke, and Americanization has replaced the word woke as the sort of boogeyman word now. Yeah, so all of a sudden Australians, and even this is not polarized. This is left and right wing Australians are now going, oh my goodness, we don't want that. So similar things happening in the UK with Keir Starmer, and probably not as much of a political shift, but Keir Starmer has had a bump. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, this is done in the rest of the world. It's like my brother actually said this great line. He said, because we did that episode, what the year woke broke.
Yeah.
And he said, this was the year woke broke and the year post woke broke. And, because the new thing now is like, I think a lot of people in the world are going, we don't want a populist. All of a sudden, the sort of like what seemed like the most unfashionable kind of politician, a boring managerial centre-left guy, is now what people want. It looks like in the rest of the West, because they don't want that.
Yes.
So this is radically changing politics in the rest of the world. And I think as it plays out in the US, it's going to be absolutely fascinating. I mean, if you look at my all of those options, apart from one, April Fool's, America will go into a period of recession. And there were the Trumpers who were always going to be pro-Trump, but Trump got a broad coalition primarily because of cost of living and the economy.
Yep.
Well, what happens when Trump's economy goes bad?
Yeah.
And so this is going to have major, major implications.
Yeah.
Can I add one more thing?
Please.
The other thing to keep an eye at, which is not getting as much news, but there's definitely a build-up of US forces in the Middle East and a redeployment of assets. And, there's real potential that there'll be some kind of action against the Houthis, which has already been happening, the group who are commanding the Red Sea or blockading the Red Sea, Yemen, and increasing possibility that there could also be action against Iran. So if that happens, there's always the possibility the Strait of Hormuz like that, where a lot of the global oil trade goes through being blocked as well. So we've got another potential economic shock potentially happening because of the White House in the next little bit.
Yeah. Okay. I think I still keep coming back to the grey zone reality that we have been in, and you kind of think you're out the other side, but
you've got grey zone. I think we were sort of saying we're starting to see the shape of what comes after grey zone. I had this line. I'm glad you reminded me. My line was, grey zone just got fluorescent grey. It's like so grey, it's blinding you. Like that's where we're in. Yeah. But, look, I going to come back to, it's not new. I'm just going to remind people. I was just at I was in Sydney. I said I flew in late last night. Releases some information, and some data that's come out of the Australian census and so on, that McCrindle group put together. and you're seeing that as uncertainty in Australia, which was a pretty comfortable secular country, that you are seeing a percentage of people moving towards God, spiritually open. There's a warmth to Christianity in Australia, which I've never seen before from this data. You're seeing older Australians, often many who have no Christian background coming to faith as they sort of face the reality of this world. So again, too, I know, again, this is upsetting and concerning, and we're just trying to help you understand what's going on. I've had so many people contact me. This is what I sort of did today. Everyone's like, Mark, what's happening? So I wanted to help you guys understand. But in the midst of this, pray for the world, pray for our leaders, pray for the global economy. Like it sounds crazy, but, stuff that happens on a little board somewhere in a stock exchange has actual implications for someone who's trying to get rice in a village on the other side of the world. Pray for the leaders of the world, and wisdom and discernment and justice and righteousness and compassion and godliness. And this is the shaking of the foundations. There's a shaking in the world. And there is, a tremendous evangelistic opportunity. Again, too, I just saw, earlier, stats coming out of the UK. Again, I think it was the Bible Society report. Young people turning to faith in dramatic ways. Pray for the world. And also, too, we know there are so many people listening to this podcast. We were joking before that, there's sort of every country now and different, there are people in these industries, in these decision-making places who are going to be dealing with the implications of this. We know there are diplomats who listen and people in finance and all this, and I just think it's a bit of a, to use your name, a bit of a Daniel moment, that you may feel small and inconsequential, but, the Lord's placed lots of people, and so let's not be afraid. Let's remember who's on our side.
Totally. Yes.
Yeah, in the midst of all of this.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for tuning in to this emergency episode.
Yeah.
Hopefully, as Mark said, hopefully it's helpful just to kind of sketch things out a bit, and and we'll see. I guess we'll keep watching, see what unfolds. But thank you, Mark, for keeping us up to date. That's us for today. We'll do a subscriber chats. So head to rebuilders.co. You can sign up there, and we'll shoot out an email with some extra chats and bits and pieces for you. Blessings.
Go well.